Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. The Zoom edition continues alongside Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us. We'll talk about a top 10 win and a new ranking for the Missouri basketball team coming up. But let's start with the football team. A tough loss to Georgia in a game where you really saw the gap between 2 and 3 in the SEC East. Georgia goes up 14-0. Missouri fights back. And really the difference in the game to me was the drive right before half. Georgia scores, then they double up in the second half. And really it's all Bulldogs from there, 49-14. And it just kind of shows where Eli Drinkwitz's team and program has to go if they want to get into the top 2, Dave.
Yeah, there's something to be said for being the best team in the middle class, which Missouri appears to be, or they're right there in the running, but there is a big gap there. We knew that going into the season. I think we knew that going into the game. It was just a matter of, okay, is Georgia going to show up? Are they going to care about this game? If they do, and they don't do silly things like penalties and turnovers, then they should probably roll in this one. And that's what happened. Missouri looked a little comfortable after they tied it up, and maybe thought, hey, this isn't so hard to play on a even stage with Georgia. And then Georgia just kind of took over with that last drive and then everything in the second half.
Gabe, I heard you on your post-game show on Power Mizzou's YouTube channel, and you were saying the same thing. It's like, this is a team that when they block a punt and then score and it's 14-14, you thought, okay, there's a little hope if they can get out of that first half. They didn't. They went down 21-14, which is still okay. But when it became 28-14, it was evident that the Bulldogs were kind of woken up by the block punt.
Yeah, that drive was big, but I also think it's a disservice to Georgia to pretend that one drive was that important in that game. It was actually a much bigger miracle that Missouri was ever tied in that game, because I looked at the stats at 14-14 and Georgia had about a 2-1 edge. I mean, even at that point, that game probably should have been like 28-10. Missouri got out of one drive, made one play on offense and blocked a punt for a 1-yard drive. I mean, that was in no way at 14-14 an even game. It almost felt like a matter of which kind of small little piece of snow starts the avalanche. And I think that drive was the one that started the avalanche. I don't think the gap is quite as big as it looked in the second half, but what you got on Saturday is what you get when the good team plays pretty well and the not as good team plays not very well.
I give credit to Georgia too, Dave, because there's a team that really, could have come into the game not caring. I mean, and then it's 14-14, you get a block punt. I give them credit for maybe rallying the troops and saying, all right, let's prove who we are. And then they did.
Yeah, I'll say I thought Kirby Smart impressed me. I mean, he made this team believe that game meant something, and really it didn't. And for Georgia's standards, it didn't. They go into every season expecting to play in the playoffs. They not only fell short of that, they didn't even win the division this year. And what's there left to play for? If you're a Georgia player who goes to Athens expecting to compete for national championships, how can you get up for a December game in Columbia, Missouri that's the difference between like the Peach Bowl and the Citrus Bowl or any other non-playoff bowl? And they came out and they played like it meant something. So you gotta credit the coach for that. He had them in believing in something that maybe wasn't exactly true. And they let their talent come out. And that's all a part of coaching. They're not going to get any kind of trophy for it, but hey, they showed that they look like the team that we thought they would be. Maybe if they go with JT Daniels earlier in the year, that game does mean more. And they're playing in Atlanta this week instead of not playing at all.
I think that's the main takeaway for Georgia in the latter half of the season is they did find the quarterback finally. And on Missouri's side, Gabe, I don't think there's a lot of questions. I don't think things were answered. I think it was just one of those Saturdays where kind of you expected that to happen and it happened.
Yeah. This has been a good season. People are excited. They should be excited. Saturday doesn't change that. What Saturday does is show you how far you have to go. Like Dave said, Missouri's the top level of the SEC's middle class right now. And I think it shows something about the SEC too, because I think if we all did power rankings in the SEC 1 to 14, Missouri'd be 7, maybe 6. and I don't think Saturday changes that. What it shows is how big a gap there is between 4 and 5, really. Because I think you could argue maybe Missouri could even be 5. Like Auburn hasn't done anything great this year. But that gap between 4 and 5, and I understand it's a little weird to say that on a day where LSU, one of those other teams, beat Florida, one of the top 4, but it also took ridiculous weather and Florida being bad and throwing a shoe 20 yards downfield for that to happen. So, I think the SEC's got one great team, 3 pretty good to really good teams, and then like 6 that are just kind of, I don't know, toss them in a hat, see what happens that day.
And it's another point to that would be if Missouri's 7th, it's a pretty good year because you have the likes of LSU's having an off year. You mentioned Auburn. So being 7th isn't the worst in this conference.
Yeah, no, you combine it with what happened on National Signing Day. Like, this is Missouri's goal to get to, yes, you're better than Kentucky and South Carolina. You're ahead of Tennessee. You're in that conversation with like an Auburn, right now an Ole Miss, maybe kind of work your way up to in the conversation with like an A&M, and then catch Georgia and Florida on the right day. It was the plan for Missouri in the Big 12. The only thing Gary Pinkel never really did is catch Oklahoma or Texas on the right day, but he cut Nebraska on the right day. He passed Nebraska as a program. So Missouri's problem now is when they were in the Big 12 doing this, there were no teams in their division that you looked at and said, Missouri can't catch them as a program. As a program, you've got 2 teams in your division you're not catching. You have to catch them in any given year. That's obviously a difficult task, but look, Missouri has done it with Florida at times since they've been in the SEC. Georgia's beaten them and a couple times beaten them really badly, really 3 times really badly, but they've also had some competitive games with Georgia. So you're just going to have to catch those teams on the right day and then go take your chances for 60 minutes in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as Gabe pointed out, the Tigers are 5-4 on this year. And Dave, no matter what happens against Mississippi State, this has been a victory, and it's been a good year for this program.
Yeah, you've exceeded all the outside expectations. Everything that this team went up against with the coronavirus that everybody dealt with, but a team with the new coaching staff probably dealt with to a higher degree because of a lot of the uncertainty. You just haven't installed everything. You haven't done all the things that you need to do in a normal year with the new staff. They're 2 plays away from being 3-6. Let's make that clear. But they finished games. You give them credit for that. Games that maybe in the past they hadn't finished. I would think though that if you lose to Mississippi State, a 2-7 team, and you end the year at 5-5, even though it may not even affect your bowl game that much, it would just kind of leave a sour feeling at the end. I think you want to finish strong here. Being able to say you went 6-4 in an SEC only schedule. It's hard to nitpick that with a first-year coach in this conference.
Dave, what are you hearing about bowl projections for this team?
This year, it's interesting because the SEC, for those that pool of 6 bowls, it kind of changes a little bit this year. But the league is basically telling the teams, hey, tell us which one you want, and we're going to go in order of record. It's not going to be as much as a mix and match with, hey, the league's going to decide, the bowls are going to decide. So Mizzou is going to be in pretty good position there. Auburn is right there, but Auburn doesn't have a coach. So I don't know how that's necessarily going to work out on Sunday. Best case scenario has got to still be the Citrus Bowl, which takes the top SEC team after the playoffs. They could go with Auburn, but if they do, then Missouri pretty much gets to decide where they want to go. And they'd like to go to Florida. It'd be Outback Bowl or the Gator Bowl. I think worst case scenario would be the Music City Bowl. They just don't want to go somewhere they've already been. And that would be the Liberty Bowl or the Texas Bowl in Houston.
And from what I hear, they really prefer the Outback Bowl, and they'd like to be in Orlando. I like the Gator Bowl better because it's just a more attractive opponent. Northwestern and Indiana don't really get, and Iowa don't get my blood boiling, but that's the game Missouri likes. The Citrus Bowl thing is interesting, though, because is Florida like a New Year's 6 bowl lock if they get blown out by Alabama with 3 losses? Because what if Florida falls out of that mix? Then all of a sudden Florida's in the Citrus Bowl and you're talking about Missouri Auburn for the Outback.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about signing day, Gabe. Yesterday, big day for Coach Drink and moving the program forward. And it seemed to me like they got a lot of the pieces that they wanted.
They did. Right now, as of today, we have them ranked 20th in the country, 8th in the SEC. And I find it interesting. Many years I get told that we don't know what we're doing ranking Missouri's players, but now that they're top 20 and we have them ranked higher than other services, we have done a phenomenal job this year. We're a great network. So thank you all for that. But this is Eli Drinkwitz is doing something that I wasn't sure could be done recruiting at Missouri, where he's got them. Now, the key is he's got to stack this class. Like, it has to be 25 again next year. It can't fall back down to 40. But I went back and looked at a lot of the numbers. Basically, over its time in the SEC, we'd agree Missouri's probably been somewhere around like the 8th or 9th best football team in the league, right? That would be my guess. Well, they've done that by never finishing higher than 12th recruiting in the league. So what everybody's always wanted to know is, look, we know we're not getting into that top 6. It's never going to happen. But what if we could find the guy that could get us to 8th in recruiting rankings? Then, hey, we've been the 9th best team with the 13th best recruiting. Could we be the 3rd best team with the 8th best recruiting? And that's what you're going to kind of hope to find out the next few years if Drinkwitz sticks around and can continue to get results like this. I thought the most impressive thing he did in the class was not actually the in-state guys, but it was going, and if you count East St. Louis as out of state, getting 3-4 stars from outside the state, maybe even 4, because some people have Tyler Macon as a 4-star. So, those are the kind of guys that Missouri hasn't gotten very often in the past.
Absolutely. And they got it, 5 4-stars this time. And the other thing, Dave, is he does say the right thing at the press conference that you always want to hear. Hey, we got to secure the borders. And, over in St. Louis, he did a pretty good job.
Yeah. And it's hard to do. I mean, it's harder now than ever, because once Missouri goes in the SEC, a lot of those SEC teams start realizing, hey, there's pretty good players in St. Louis. We should go there. And you can visit a whole bunch of them in a normal year where you can do in-person recruiting. You can stop at a bunch of schools in just a few hours. And that's happened in the league. You're seeing players in St. Louis go to, not just in the SEC, you're seeing a lot go to Ohio State. You're seeing Notre Dame. You're seeing Alabama come up every once in a while. So the competition's really fierce there, but he did a good job. And he got those guys on board, most of them, before ever coaching a game, which I think is probably the most impressive thing that he did with this class. And also hit on some very immediate needs. I mean, they loaded up. A third of this class is defensive linemen. You don't have to watch too many of their games to realize that's something that they need to add. And they went out and just loaded up on those guys. So, every coach is satisfied with their class. But I thought maybe the most interesting comment he made was pointing out the rankings, which they never do, but pointing out that they got as many 5-star kids in one year that Missouri's gotten collectively the last 4 years combined, which you can say that was kind of some shade at the past coaching staff, but it is true. If you're gonna look at these things, you're gonna add them up and you're gonna analyze them. You can't deny the success compared to the most recent past.
The universal rule about recruiting rankings is that no coach pays attention to them. Every coach hates them until they start to make me look good. Then I'm probably going to trot those out in a press release.
Right.
No doubt. And the fans love to hear that. And that is all that they eat up. By the way, we mentioned the Tigers play Mississippi State. That'll be on Saturday at 2:30. The game is on the SEC Alternate Network, and Missouri is favored in that game. So we'll talk about that next week. But when we come back, we'll get to your tweets. Still going to get to basketball as they pull off the upset in the bragging rights game against number 6 Illinois. We'll talk about all that when we come back. You're watching Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Welcome back to Tiger Sidelines, everybody. I'm Bo Bayman, joined as always by Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond. Thanks for joining us here on MC22. We're at Tiger Sidelines on Twitter. Our first one from Steve says he's talking about the recruiting classes and do we take stock in what they do? And I think the answer is no until we see them.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can't really, here's what I've always said about rankings. On an individual basis, they're pretty meaningless, right? I mean, 5-star kids turn into busts, 2-star kids turn into Sean Weatherspoon sometimes. But right. You sign 4 classes of 4-star kids against 4 classes of 2- and 3-star kids. You know what you usually get? Georgia versus Missouri last weekend. I mean, we miss on individual kids all the time. We generally don't miss on 20 of them every year.
especially the good ones. I mean, that was the difference last week, Dave. I mean, you saw the 5 stars versus the 3 stars on the field.
Right. And you can, there's something to be said for a program that can get by without getting all those players and having a really good player development program, really good player evaluation program. And that was the MO of Gary Pinkel. That's why he is a guy who is nominated for the College Football Hall of Fame, because that was his method. But if you don't have that track record, if you're not somebody who's done that over time for a long time, and that's kind of Eli Drinkwitz, he doesn't really have that kind of track record yet. You got to go out there and get some pretty good players, and if you can do that, then you give yourself a chance. So yeah, I think you don't guarantee yourself wins with a top 20 class like this one, but you feel better about it than you would with what was last year was the 54th best class. So I'd rather have the better players.
Bob wants to know, how do the rankings equal on-field performance? I just want to touch on this because I know you've both said it, how much Gary Pinkel is underappreciated for that, because he went and got guys who were lower stars and obviously coached them up into success.
Missouri fans got spoiled thinking that what Gary Pinkel does is replicatable. I don't think that's a word, replicable. I don't know, but it's really not. Very few people have done that. So look, I actually did this last year from 2008 to 2018. The average recruiting class ranking of the national champion was 5.5 in those 11 years. So you're talking about 44 recruiting classes. There was one that ranked outside the top 15. 1 out of 44. The only team that won a national title that didn't average a recruiting class of 10 or better was Auburn. And oh, by the way, that team had Cam freaking Newton on it. So, you can't win at that level without recruiting at that level. I saw a tweet this morning that said, in the history of the college football playoff, there are 6 teams who have won at least one game. They are the top 6 teams in recruiting rankings this year. Yeah. The rich get richer in college football. Look, there is parity in every other sport because they have this thing called a draft. Until there is some reward for finishing where Vanderbilt finishes or where Kansas or Illinois finishes, until you get that, it can't happen. The best way it's been put, I heard Dan Wetzel put it, it's like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and USC get to draft for 5 rounds before anybody else even gets to pick a player. It's like going and telling the New York Jets right now, we're going to give Andy Reid 5 picks, and then we're going to let you pick, and then you got to go beat Andy Reid's team on the field. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Hey, want to thank everybody for those tweets and those questions. And when we come back, we'll talk basketball, because we got to talk basketball. You're watching Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Welcome back to Tiger Sidelines, everybody. Gabe, Dave, and Bo here, and let's talk basketball. What a win for Konzo Martin's team, beating number 6 Illinois in the bragging rights game. That's 3 in a row in the bragging rights showdown, and 81-78. Really a great first half for Missouri, and the second half that was good enough, and they buckled down when they needed to, but just an impressive win, Gabe, by this club.
No question. And really the 4th, maybe 5th impressive win of the season. I don't know how much you count Oral Roberts, but this team has done as much as anybody in the country. And the crazy part to me is we've seen flashes of their best play, but I don't think at any point we've come out of any of these games and said that was 40 really good minutes. I think for the most part, we've said that was 25 or 30 really good minutes. So it intrigues you what they could do if they do put a full game together.
And interestingly enough, in this game, really didn't get anything out of Mark Smith. Jeremiah Tillman was okay, and they still ended up winning, Dave. I mean, this was a team win. And the thing that I really took out of this was the guys on the bench were doing a lot of cheering for the guys on the floor. I mean, we haven't seen that in the past. It seems to me that this team is more galvanized.
Yeah, I think so. And they're deeper too. And Illinois had the 2 best players on the floor. Io DeSumo and Kofi Coburn played as well as, if not better than anybody on Missouri's team for sure. 2 of Missouri's better players gave you next to nothing. Missouri still wins the game, which is crazy. And it had nothing to do with home court advantage or anything like that. Officiating was bad on both sides. I think the two probably most important players in the game were Javon Pickett, who kind of carried him at times offensively early, and Mitchell Smith, who just did a little bit of everything. Illinois didn't have that guy. They didn't have those guys come in off the bench and give their team energy and some of the kind of invisible plays that you get from Mitchell. He also scored 8 points and had 7 rebounds. He was more productive than Jeremiah in every way. That's a really promising thing that this team, like Gabe said, they have guys that have off nights in every game this year, and they've still been able to win because somebody else comes through, not necessarily for the whole game, but for stretches, whether that's Pinson or whether that's Drew Smith or Mitchell Smith and Pickett. Kobe Brown had a good game the other night. They may not have an all SEC player on this team, but they've got 8-9 guys that are going to give you something you can count on every night.
Here's along those lines, and I'm curious if you guys agree with this. I think that makes for a really good regular season team, right? Because on any night, Mark Smith can be off and Drew Smith can pick it up. Drew Smith can be off and X Pinson can pick it up. But when you get to the postseason, when you get to the NCAA tournament, I think you find yourselves in at least one game, and sometimes a lot of games, where you need Kemba Walker, or you need Io DeSunmo, or you need that guy. Now, I think Pinson is the closest to that guy Missouri has, and there was a basket. I think Missouri was up 78-76, about 45 seconds left, and Pinson never passed the ball. He took it to the lane, and he scored. And so I think when push comes to shove, he is that guy for this team, but I don't know if he's a guy that takes over for 8 to 10 minutes. And look, first world problems, Missouri would love to have that problem in an NCAA tournament game for the first time in a long time. But it does make me wonder when you get down to games like that, if the way this team is built, kind of almost we look back on it and say it got him here, but it's also what had him exit.
Right. It was like Conzo's first team. Remember, I mean, Cassius Robertson, Jordan Barnett were the guys. Then you bring Michael Porter Jr. into the fold, and he's trying to play hero ball, and it just didn't work. Like what got them there wasn't that team anymore, and it was a mess. So yeah, I think there's something to that. But I think Pinson and Drew Smith at times they can do that for you. They just haven't had to yet, and I don't know if they're going to need to during the regular season. It'll be interesting if they can make that leap.
Drew Smith named the SEC Player of the Week. Mizzou named the National Team of the Week, and they got ranked 16th. I mean, when you go from receiving votes to 16th, that's quite a jump. Some people figure it wasn't enough, but I, after the game, loved Conzo Martin saying it doesn't matter until December at least, and really, who cares?
You know what the beauty of it is? In basketball, it never matters.
Right.
Because basketball, like they have a tournament and you win the tournament on the floor. I mean, look, I know fans like rankings and they're important and all that, but they really aren't important because they're imperfect. I mean, look, guys, we're talking about a playoff committee in football that just dropped Cincinnati for the same reason it refuses to drop Ohio State. The football committee has said, look, if you're not in one of these 5 leagues, like we made our mind up, you're never getting in our club. We don't want you to. And I understand Missouri. If you look on paper, like, yeah, maybe Missouri should be ranked like 2nd or 3rd. They've done more than most teams, but it's a subjective thing. And it's just not worth getting angry about. If you keep winning, like you're going to be there in the end, no matter what the AP says or the sports information directors that vote for their coaches say, you're going to be there and you're going to have a chance.
And you have to accept that some of these voters are just asleep at the wheel. I mean, full disclosure, I'm an AP voter this year. First like month or so of the season, maybe 6 weeks, I kind of tear up my ballot every week because the body of work expands every week. And what you thought was true at end of November is not true anymore. But Missouri wasn't on 13 ballots this week. Like, how can you justify turning in your ballot and not having the team that's 5-0 with 2 wins over ranked teams in your top 25? And some of those had Illinois ranked. One of them had Illinois in the top 10 still. What's the point? I mean, that's why you can't put too much stock into a system that's so flawed.
That and Dave, not to like put you on poll attacks here or anything, but like in a given week. So this week, when you're covering Missouri football, you're covering 2 Missouri basketball games. How many other teams do you actually sit down and watch play a full game?
Not many at all. Not
one,
many
maybe?
All. Right. Not many at all. I just try to look at, compare everybody's body of work. I'm not putting hours into it, though. They're not paying me for anything. So I'm just trying to get a snapshot of who I think based on what we've seen. And, you at least gotta you have to account for the head-to-head matchups. I think at this point, if you're not, then why are you doing this?
Well, the truth is they should just let fans vote for the top 25, because I promise most fans see more college football or more college. Like literally last Saturday, the only football game I watched was Missouri and Georgia. That's it. And the only basketball game I watched was Missouri and Illinois. So I don't know. I couldn't rank 25 other teams. I didn't see any of them play.
I think we can all agree that Illinois win down the road is going to be something special. That team is going to be good, especially in a loaded Big Ten. They're going to be salty.
They've already played Cincinnati, just clobbered Minnesota, who's not a bad team. So yeah, I think people have said since the season started that's a Final Four caliber team because they've got two things. They've got a dominant big man and they've got a guard in Io who can take you, to the end, and a good coach in Brad Underwood. So yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really valuable asset for Missouri's credentials here come March.
After 17 days, Robin Pinchton's team finally got on the court. They lost to Missouri State 72-58. Missouri State, of course, ranked 20th in the country, and then followed it up with an 84-45 win over New Orleans. It's a tough ask to come and play the 20th ranked team after you've been off because of COVID. 5 people in quarantine. Coach was out a week and a half. That was a tough ask, and I know that they're happy to be going again.
Yeah, it's tough, but also like this is an important year for Robin, and everybody's been in it. I know she's bringing in new players and all that, but when you bring in a lot of transfers, the idea is we need this to work because they're not going to be here for 4 years, so we need this to work in pretty soon. The Missouri State loss is not a bad loss, but you'd probably have liked to be a little bit more competitive because they're going to play a whole bunch of teams that are a whole lot better than Missouri State starting here in about a week and a half.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They have 2 games this weekend. They've just announced they play at 12:30 both Saturday and Sunday. By the way, the men's team will play on Friday night at 7:00, and then they'll play Bradley on Tuesday. So they have a couple before Christmas as well. Before we get out of here, Missouri ends the regular season in football. And Dave, I'll start with you. What do they do against Mississippi State?
It's kind of a tricky game. And Drinkwitz made the point because Mississippi State schemes are a little unique. Obviously, they got Mike Leach's, 5 wide all the time, passing game. They don't bother running the ball. And their defense, they play like a 3-3 front, which is unique. So it's a little difficult to prepare for. But man, Mississippi State can't beat anybody. I mean, their only win since that LSU win is against Vanderbilt, and that was still a close game. So it seems like this team's been kind of checked out for a few weeks now, maybe months. That said, Missouri doesn't look like a team right now, just depth-wise, that can go in and blow anybody out. So I would expect this to be competitive. You'd think Missouri wants to end their season on a good note, but they're pretty banged up. So I think it's a close game. I think Missouri's favored by 1, and I don't know, that's a toss-up.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very anti-Mike Leach game, and that it's not going to be 50-45. It's going to be like 17-13. It's going to be kind of a nasty rock fight between two offenses that have had a hard time getting going. I think Missouri probably makes enough plays for all the reasons Dave said. I mean, in a year where they've overachieved and done things they aren't supposed to do, the key is doing what you are supposed to do, and what they are supposed to do is go win this game.
Absolutely. And they would finish off the regular season 6-4. Okay, that'll do it for this edition of Tiger Sidelines. Want to thank Brian and Matt behind the scenes. For Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, I'm Bo Bayman. We'll see you next week on Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.